Okay, before we talk about the movie, I do, unfortunately, have to address the event that occurred at the midnight screening in Colorado last night. For those of you who don't know, Google it, look it up, but I'm not going to share the gruesome details. But there was a shooting that resulted in the deaths of a large number of people and injured many more. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that if you know anyone who was involved in that, or heaven forbid were there yourself, that my heart goes out to you, and you probably wouldn't be watching this, but really, but if you are, you know, something like this should never happen, and to try and think about why is it just kind of leads, it just kind of leads to madness on all fronts, really. And it's a horrible thing to try and process. It's horrible that it happened, but I needed to address it because, otherwise people are gonna, but, if you want to discuss that elsewhere, you can, but for now, we're just going to talk about the movie here. I just wanted to say that, it was truly, it's a terrible thing that's happened, and, my heart goes out to those people, so, keep them in your thoughts and prayers, everybody, and, now I guess we'll talk about the movie.
What does that mean?
Rise.
When Gotham is ashes, you have my permission to die.
So for once, my Batman shirt that I wear pretty frequently, just as one of the only things that my character can be identified by. I have a J.O. shirt, but I never actually wear that unless I'm doing a con or something. But anyway, a lot of people recognize me in the Batman shirt for whatever reason. I guess I just appeared in enough crossovers or something like that wearing it. Now it's actually appropriate to what I'm talking about. Fancy that. So, okay, so The Dark Knight Rises. This is going to be a spoiler-free vlog, and just generally speaking, every time I've done a vlog, I don't spoil shit unless the movie is absolutely fucking god-awful. I think the only spoiler review I've ever done was Dark Shadows. Even then, I don't think I spoiled that much. I think there are chunks of it that I just went, you know what? Fuck it. Okay. But, no. I will not be spoiling anything. Don't worry, don't panic, because I know this is like this and the Avengers are, biggest movie of the year kind of thing. And I will say which one I think is better by the end of this, by the way. I actually don't care. I don't think, it's fair to compare movies that are obviously so very different. But because that is a question that's circulating around the internet and everybody, like, it's sort of like a conversation starter question for the movie summer, I'll give my answer. But first of all, so The Dark Knight Rises, well, it was good. Like, that's the short version. Good movie. It's not going to be a disappointment. It doesn't shit the bed. Particularly as it works as the third part of a trilogy. It is very much like most third parts to most trilogies. It is the biggest. There's the most at stake. It is the most emotional. It's the most overt. It's the least subtle. It's the most cheesy. And this applies the longest. This applies to a large number of trilogies. And all the things I'm saying, particularly the word cheesy, seems to, not necessarily a bad thing. In this case, not a bad thing. It didn't affect the movie negatively to any great degree. But, so specifically to talk about, I guess, little facets of it that aren't spoilery. Production-wise, the movie is gorgeous. It's a lot of fun to watch. People seem to either take issue with or, like, absolutely adore the way Nolan does action scenes. Me, I'm actually not really. I should say I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan, and particularly also his brother, Jonathan Nolan, who does not get as much attention, but he writes all the shit that Christopher Nolan makes, which they write it together. To be fair, it's not a one man does one thing kind of deal, but he has a very heavy effect on the content of Christopher's movies. So, be fair, gives Jonathan some credit. And I love his movies in general, but the Batman films I've always been kind of fascinated by because They're just sort of him doing his movies in Batman drag. They're not really adaptations in the same way that Captain America was a good adaptation that gave you a real feel for the best aspects of the comic book. Because Captain America is not an easy movie to do, but they pulled it off really well, and it was like, sort of a love letter to the Captain America character. The Batman movies are not, they're like, you could put any other characters in them. I know this sounds crazy, like, really? And with some differences, you could put any other characters in them, and it would be like, this is a story that Christopher Nolan, these are themes, and these are ideas, and these are concepts that he's fascinated with, and he's just gonna do them. And, Batman characters happen to be the faces that he's using this time. And, so I like his other movies, Memento, The Prestige, even Insomnia. Like, I tend to like them a little better. I left out Inception, because I like Inception, but it's not as deep as his other movies are. It's smart. It's incredibly intelligent, but it's not as thematically deep. And so, The Dark Knight Rises, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. The Dark Knight Rises, like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and all of Nolan's other movies, can be easily enjoyed and 100% understood by just about everybody. And that's why they're so successful, and that's why they ring true, and people really like Nolan, and, because they think he's really smart and everything. He is, but, they are mass market movies. This is going to be a really comfortable kind of film. Ooh, thunder. Which is interesting because The Dark Knight couldn't really be called a comfortable film. But that's sort of a tonal difference. This is a little happier, this is a little bit more uplifting. We've reached our darkest point, you just can't do The Dark Knight anymore. So putting aside that, it's not as good as The Dark Knight, but it's as good as Batman Begins, and it is a very good film. And, like I said, completely entertaining to mass audiences, and here's what I really like about Nolan's movies, if you are a little bit more critically inclined, if you're the analytical type, if you like to study storytelling and just, really take a needle point to how it's constructed, there's a lot of depth here. The acting is, Nolan knows how to direct actors well, because he's got some incredibly talented people here, but nobody really hits the same. He doesn't have, all the actors kind of acting the same emotionally. They react emotionally completely differently to different circumstances. Anne Hathaway has proven that, under the wrong director's care, she could suck really hard. Anne Hathaway is the most impressive acting part in the movie. And that's really saying a lot, because absolutely everybody, even Tom Hardy, the British Bane, I know, British Bane, okay, it's Nolan's characterization. It's not really like the comics, it's fine. Anne Hathaway steals the show. She's so good in this, and she's very believable too. It's not just she's cool and she's feisty, and no, there's such a depth to her. And you really believe it and you root for her, and that's great. And, thematically there's a lot of fascinating things going on here, both with Bruce Wayne's character and where's he going to end up, and this is such a fitting third part to what's been built up for his character. He has a full arc, it comes full circle, it stops, it is conclusive, it could not really have been, you could continue the story, but why would you want to? It's always that thing of, you don't want to make it feel like the world has stopped with this story, and it hasn't, but we don't need to know anything else. We would want more, but we really don't need it. We are satisfied. And that's kind of what happens with Batman's character, as characterized in these Nolan movies. And also thematically, the idea of Bane and Batman as foils to one another. This is not spoilery. That's Bruce Wayne is a rich guy that understands the world of the rich and sees the corruption in it because he came from a place where he was poor. He wasn't born into poverty, but he understands that world. He identifies with it because he was a very lost, lonely kid, and and just do I have to explain this? You know. But here's the thing: they're comparing this financial power with physical prowess in comparison to Bane, because that's a lot of what Batman's problem is he's getting old and he's deteriorated over time and he's not at his physical peak. And so, and it's interesting that they blow up the financial district. in this there's an assault on the city that I won't specify much of what happens, but there's explosions and they blow up the financial district and they attack it and they punish the rich, but they also target like a football game, and there's just a lot of connection to resentment for the worship of the physically powerful and comparing physical power to financial power. And my point is, I'm going somewhere with this. It is a very deep movie if you wanted to get depth out of it. If you're really paying attention, it has layers to it. But if you're not, if you just want to enjoy, a popcorn movie, it functions completely on that level too. So it's like all of Nolan's other movies in that regard. Like, that's the kind of thing he does. He casts a very wide net, and I'm always behind that. Okay, so now here's the issue. So when it comes to, okay, well, The Dark Knight Rises, like, it's a good movie, what else do you need to know? There are flaws, it is a flawed movie, it's not as good as The Dark Knight, I don't think anybody could expect it to be, it's as good as Batman Begins, whatever. But how does it directly compare tonally to the other two movies? Well, remember the story of the three bears? Like, the mama bear, papa bear, and baby bear, and they went out because my porridge is too hot, my porridge is too cold, and mine is just right. When Goldilocks came by. Okay, that's this trilogy. The Batman Begins was too cold. Its flaws kind of laid in its construction and your investment in it. It wasn't that, it was plotted very well and introduced everything very well, but getting people to give a shit was, people don't remember Batman Begins as visceral experience. They remember maybe as a smart movie, but it's hard to connect to. It is kind of indicative of what a lot of people accuse Christopher Nolan's movies of being like, and that they're totally cold and just intellectual, and it's smart rich people talking to other smart rich people, and there's no emotional connection there. And not everybody, because a lot of people like this director, but not everybody thinks that way, but some people are like, oh, they're all the same, they're this way. Batman Begins is like the closest, is the most like that of any of his movies. Like, I disagree fully. There are parts of Inception that just, that are fully based on people just losing control of their emotions 100%. He does not make emotionless, cold movies. But if he did, Batman Begins is one of them. It's a little cold. I mean, it's about this guy wanting vengeance for the death of his parents, and you just don't quite care, because that's not really what it's about. In fact, Nolan has trouble coming back to Batman being about thunder. I think Batman's angry at me, guys. He has trouble coming back to that central idea, and he likes to broaden it to large ideas about Gotham and what it represents in Batman as a symbol, and we know this, and that's why The Dark Knight was better. Because it was about that. It wasn't about Batman and his parents, because Nolan is not interested in that. It was something that he had to do, but, So Batman Begins is too cold. The Dark Knight is just right. People have talked about The Dark Knight enough. I don't have to explain why. You know why. The Dark Knight is just right. It is such a good movie. It is, that's the pinnacle. What more can you say? So let's talk about The Dark Knight Rises. That's too warm. So we've had too cold, just right. This is the too hot movie. It is subtle as a paisley brick. It is so, like I said, his movies are able to be understood by everybody, and they're not, they're not difficult to understand. Everything is real clear. But this one is like, there are aspects where it's like, okay, you didn't have to tell us that. You didn't have to show us that. It is very long, and it's just, most third parts of most trilogies, like, to give that extra emotional punch and make sure you got it, they hammer it in harder, and they raise the stakes, and it's more over the top and ridiculous. And this one was, and, ridiculous, like nitpick here. It was not a ridiculous movie, I mean, just comparatively. We're into the comparative stage now. I've already just said, by itself, it's good. And the best thing about it, I think, is just the thematic underpinnings, not the plot-by-plot events, but the thematic underpinnings, and the acting. The acting is so good in this movie. But, so this one's too warm. It's just not subtle. It's really a little bit emotionally overwrought. There are things in it that are, well, give him this, give him this happiness, give him this triumph, etc. And it's a crowd pleaser. This Dark Knight Rises is, and you say crowd pleaser, The Dark Knight certainly seemed to please crowds, right? But it was uncomfortable. People came out of The Dark Knight shaken. I did, anyway. I know a lot of people did.